All right, so this is Unit 9, which was social psychology, and it was actually the second unit that we did at the beginning of the year. Social psychology, scientific study of how we think about and influence and relate to one another. So, psychology is just studying our individual behavior, social psych is studying our individual behavior in the context of a group. Sociology studies the actual group behavior. Oh, wait, y'all can't actually see it in class. Sorry. No one was going to say anything that I didn't duplicate it. All right, now we can see it. All right, so some different theories. The attribution theory is how we explain the causes of people's behavior, whether it's the cause of the situation, their external factors like their environment, or is it their internal disposition, their personality, and their internal factors. So if we say it's a situational attribution, we say that it's the situation. So if you get a 5 on your AP Psych exam, situational would be like, it was because of your amazing teacher who prepared you so well. The dispositional would be you taking the personal credit. I am so smart and I studied so hard to get this 5. But we know in reality it's going to be both. The fundamental attribution error is our tendency to over-attribute other people's behavior on their dispositional factors. Like somebody who's always late, you're like, oh, they're always late. They're so careless. But when you're late, it's it's like internal factors. So it could be that they had some situational factor, but you think you tend to blame on others for their internal factors. Self-serving bias is our tendency to attribute one's successes to internal factors and your failures to external factors. So, yay, an A+, I'm so smart. I take the credit. An F, it's because the teacher doesn't like me. So that's self-serving. Whatever serves you best, whether you take the credit or blame the credit somewhere else, that's self-serving. The false consensus effect is a cognitive bias where people tend to overestimate the extent to which their opinions are typical. So you think, well, I don't like this, so nobody else likes this either. But that's really only you and maybe your friend group. And that's an availability heuristic where you're basing it off of the most easily accessible information. Well, that's your area. So people tend to think, well, my high school is like this. Every high school is like this. But it's not. We don't know. That's the false consensus effect. Part of the attribution theory, the just world hypothesis. This is another cognitive bias that our actions will inherently bring due consequences. So people have a tend to, like when bad things happen to people, you're like, oh, well, they got in a wreck. That's probably because they drive too fast or they don't take good care of their car. Things just happen to them. And you think it's their fault when it could totally not be their fault. So it tends to lead to victim blaming, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people who deserve it, but it's not always accurate. The halo effect, also called the halo error, is your tendency to give a positive impression of a person or a brand or a product or anything after just one positive situation with that person. But it could be wrong. Like you just have one interaction with them and you're like, oh, they're so great. Or I love them in that movie. They must be a great person. But that's only that one instance. That's the halo effect. The horn effect is the opposite, where you have one negative interaction with somebody and then you have you just think they're a terrible person. Like the people who had me for the freshman biology test probably think I'm the meanest teacher ever, the horn effect, but they only saw me in that one scenario. All right. The elaboration likelihood model. I never remember that these are actually called that. We just usually remember these as the major routes of persuasion. So central route to persuasion is direct. This is where you're trying to influence somebody based on scientific and logical arguments and not just opinions. So like if I'm trying to convince you to buy this car or this minivan, I'm going to say, this has all these safety tests. This can seat this many people. It's got this many cup holders. It's going to retain its resale value. So all real solid evidence. Peripheral route to persuasion is indirect, and you're trying to sway them, cause them to make snap judgments. A lot of it has to do with the attractiveness of the speaker or the item. So that would be, buy this sports car. You'll look really cool. Maybe the salesperson is really attractive. This car goes so fast, and this car was in this movie. That's peripheral route to persuasion. So central, the solid scientific evidence and the solid logical data. Peripheral is more opinion and trying to influence you to usually make a quick decision. Some attitudes that follow behaviors. The foot in the door phenomenon is our tendency for people to agree to a small request, and then you're going to follow up and follow along with a bigger request. So with a salesman, they usually start this with, they get their foot in the door just saying, hey, how are you? Can I just have a minute of your time? And if you agree with that, then you're going to agree with the next thing, and you're going to listen to them for a few minutes. And before you know it, you bought a subscription that's going to last you for 5 years. The Milgram obedience experiment, and I think it was on the mock exam, is an example of the foot in the door phenomenon, because they get participants to agree to come into an experiment. That's how they get their foot in the door. Then they tell them, all right, draw your name or draw a job out of this hat. You're going to be a teacher. And by the end of it, they're shocking people possibly to their death, they think. So that's foot in the door. You start with a small request, and before you know it, they're complying with a bigger request. Door in the face is the opposite. You start with a really big request, and then that's denied. So then you come down with a smaller request, and that sounds better. But really, you started, that's what you wanted in the first place. So if you want to get $20 from your parents, and you think they're going to say no to $20, start at 50. Can I borrow $50? And they're like, no, that's too much. Like, okay, well, how about 20? I'm like, okay, that sounds better. And that's what you actually wanted. Maybe they'll actually give you more, but that's the door in the face. Cognitive dissonance theory, we've talked about this again in multiple units. Inconsistency or dissonance between their attitudes and behaviors, and they become anxious. This was Leon Festinger. Because behavior is difficult to change, people usually reduce the dissonance, that uncomfortable feeling, by changing their inconsistent attitude. So they kind of lie to themselves, or they're in denial rather than actually changing their behavior. Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, very famous as one of the unethical experiments. This is the one where they hired a bunch of college students, and they asked them to participate in a fake prison. They were either assigned the job of prisoner or assigned the job of prison guard. And it was supposed to be every day for 2 weeks. I don't have more there. And it went way out of control. The guards became extremely verbally abusive. They weren't physically abusive, but they did things like parade them around naked. They made them sleep deprived. They just told them all kinds of terrible things, and the prisoners mostly just accepted it. There was one who had to leave because he was having a mental breakdown. And when asked why did all these people, what happened? And they basically said they were just playing the role that they thought they were supposed to. So it's about the power of the situation, that when you're in a situation, you do what you think you're expected to do. Even Zimbardo himself talked about that he got wrapped up in it because he was the prison warden. And even he didn't kind of realize how bad things were until a colleague told him. But they shut it down on day 3, I think. And it was supposed to be a 2-week thing. Solomon Asch's conformity experiment, the famous line experiment, where there was one actual participant and the others were what they called confederates, people who were in on it. They knew about it. So they showed the participant this first line, and then they asked him which of these other lines are the same length. And the obvious correct answer is C. But all the other people who were fake and in on the experiment, they said the wrong answer. To see, would the participant also say the wrong answer to conform? And in the majority of cases, they did lie, or not lie, but they went along with the wrong answer because they felt the power to conform. It depended. So about 1/3 of trial participants regularly conformed. 75%, though, conformed at least once throughout the experiment. They conformed with the wrong answer. Things that influenced whether or not they conformed were the size of the group, their status within the group, the observation, or the unanimity, whether or not the majority of the group had the right or wrong answer. Let's see. So reasons for conformity, and this was on the mock FRQ, normative and informative social influence. So when it's coming down to you deciding, am I going to do what other people are doing? Normative says you just want to avoid social rejection. So you respect the norms. You don't really know what to do and you don't want to stick out. So you just go along with what everybody else is doing. You want to wear what people are wearing. In the Ash study, that was showing normative. Informative social influence is that the group actually may have correct, valuable information. Like you're not sure what to do, but you think these other people do know what to do, so you're following them. So the one that was on the test was like they're at a theme park. How does informative social influence fit in? That maybe you don't know what ride would be is like the highest ranked ride in the park, and somebody says this is the number one ranked roller coaster in the country. Well, that's some information you didn't know, so you choose that ride. But when you don't want to make an actually wrong information, that's informative. When you're just trying to respect the norms of the group and be socially approved, that's normative. All right. Compliance is just when we adjust or follow along with people's requests. If it's a direct request, that's explicit. If it's an indirect request, that's implicit compliance. And then here again is Milgram's obedience experiment, studied the effects of authority on obedience. Again, participants, I think they were responding to an ad in a newspaper. And then when they came in, they were randomly, well, it wasn't random. It appeared that they were being randomly assigned to the job of student or teacher, but it was rigged somehow. But they were given the job of teacher, and they were told that the other participant had to memorize a series of words. And every time they got the word in the sequence wrong, they were to give them a shock. And every time they got it wrong, the shocks increased in intensity. And after a while, they would kind of like they'd want to stop, but the experimenter was sitting right there and would say, we need you to keep going. We need you to keep going. And designed to determine conditions under which people would obey or defy authority. It was really kind of done because this was post-World War II, and they wanted to know why were so many Nazi soldiers willing to go along with what their authority figures were telling them what to do in hurting the Jewish people in camps. And they had different kinds of people who were skilled, people who were educated, uneducated. The shocks were not real, but the participants did not know that. So why did they obey? Most rationalized that they felt that the experimenter was responsible, and they did not feel personally responsible. But a large percentage of them were willing to shock all the way. It is considered a very unethical experiment because it put a lot of stress on the participants. And the other big thing is they did not properly debrief most of the participants. Some of them got a letter later on telling them the shocks were not real. Some of them never knew. And one person always talked about that they searched the obituaries looking for the person who was the other one because they literally thought they had killed them. And then somehow they found out it was fake. I don't know. All right. Social dilemmas or social traps. These are situations in which selfish behavior that benefits an individual in the short run may spell disaster for an entire group in the long run. So examples of that would be like pollution. Like, I'm going to throw my trash out the window every day. You know, it's good for me. My car is clean and doesn't stink. It's bad for the environment. So people who are doing things that benefit them individually, like somebody cheats on a test and they get a good grade, but then the teacher finds out and punishes all the students, that's an example of a social trap. The prisoner dilemma is a sort of social trap. So two people are accused of a crime, or they did do actually a crime. They're separated immediately after they're arrested. The DA believes they're guilty, but he lacks evidence. So he tells them, if you both refuse to confess, each of you will be convicted of a minor offense and jailed for 1 year. If you both confess, the DA recommends only a 5-year sentence. But if one of them stays silent and one confesses, it will allow the confessing prisoner to go free, and the other one will serve 10 years. So they really are both guilty, so ideally they should both confess, no, what does it say? They're only jailed for 1 year. If they both refuse to confess, they only get 1 year. That would benefit them both. But they want to do what's best for themselves, so because they want to stick it to the other person. But they refuse. Basically, the thing is that they refuse to compromise. If they had both compromised, it would be better for them both, but they will not work together. That's the prisoner dilemma. That one's really hard to explain. Sorry, I didn't say it better. All right, social facilitation and social inhibition. These are one of the confusing pairs, which I'm going to make a separate video for that because we don't have time in class. But social facilitation is when you do better in front of others. And that's usually for simple or well-learned tasks. So a lot of times this goes with athletes. who know how to play their sport, they do better when they have a big crowd that's watching them. So you do better when you have people watching you if it's something that you know how to do well. Social inhibition is where you do worse when people are watching you. Usually it's because it's a more difficult task, or just your perceptions of the crowd that's evaluating or judging you. So not considering like anxiety and stuff like that, just in general, social facilitation, you do better when people are watching you, especially if it's an easier, well-learned task. And then social inhibition, you do worse. Like the football team wants people to come watch them when they know they're doing well and they're going to win, or they want to win. Social inhibition, if they're doing something difficult, somebody's doing something really difficult, they don't really want to invite people. Social loafing, we've talked about this, the tendency that the larger the group gets, that people will feel less personally responsible and they will loaf, or they will not do their part. Teachers know this. This is why we try not to put you in groups bigger than like 3, because of social loafing. De-individuation, also called the mob mentality, is that you tend to lose your self-awareness when you're in a big group, and your self-restraint, and you feel more anonymous. This can be good tomorrow night at prom when everybody's dancing, and maybe you're not a great dancer, but you lose that self-awareness because everybody else is dancing. They won't really see you. This is negative when people decide that they're going to be part of a mob and riot. Or like, what's it called when there's like a disaster and people go, looting. They go and like throw bricks into stores, and then they all go in and steal stuff, and they're like, no one's going to catch me. Nowadays, though, especially, it's going to be on a video somewhere. They're going to see you. In the old days, like people would do looting and they had a better chance of getting away with it. But all that is de-individuation. So it can be good or bad. Group polarization is when you have a group with different views about whether you like something or not. You're going to be more, it's better to explain this one with an example. Say we're talking about Justin Bieber. Some of you kind of like Justin Bieber. Some of you kind of hate him. When you get with the people who like him, that enhances your like for him. When you get with the other people who dislike him, that enhances your hate for him, so that you become more polarized. You separate more on your opinion. So it enhances your attitude through discussion, like, oh yeah, I remember that song. That's right. We love him. Or, man, he's so annoying. Remember that? And we really dislike him. So you become more strengthened in your view. It's more polarized. You become more towards the opposite end of the spectrum. Groupthink, when we are in the presence of others, a way of thinking that you desire harmony, and that kind of overrides the best decision. So you're just trying to come up with a good common response, but sometimes you're ignoring other factors. So you tend to not evaluate others' opinions, your inability to comprehend negative consequences. A lot of times this happens when the group is making a decision and they're isolated. They're not hearing what other people think. There's time limits. Or when you have a really strong leader and you're like, okay, we got to go along with them. The classic example of this was the Bay of Pigs fiasco in Cuba, where it was decided that they should use Cuban rebels to try to attack the Cuban government, and that didn't go so well. But the U.S. government leaders had kind of made that decision on their own without a lot of outside input, and it was a flop. Social identities in and out groups. So in group are just the people you identify with. The out group are the ones you don't identify with. And this is in the mock exam also, the FRQ. But you tend to favor your own group, and you tend to think better of them. You tend to root for them, the people that you can root for. Social identities. Jane Elliott had the famous blue eye, brown eye experiment. She was trying to teach her children about discrimination and prejudice right after the assassination of Martin Luther King, where she told her classes, instead of talking about like black versus white, she talked about brown-eyed versus blue-eyed. So one day all the brown-eyed kids were superior. Another day all the blue-eyed kids were superior. And those kids really felt the difference, and they felt discrimination and prejudice. And it even showed up in their academic work that they did better or worse depending on if they were being treated as the superior group. The frustration aggression principle says that frustration creates anger, which can create aggression, generate aggression, meaning people won't be aggressive unless they're frustrated. So that's why often things like that happen in society, like crime, happen in areas where people tend to be more frustrated with lack of jobs or poor leadership, or prejudice and bias, that those things lead to aggression. So more frustration leads to aggression. Another good example of that is road rage. When people are in traffic and they're frustrated that they can't get through traffic and then somebody cuts them off, they're more likely to become aggressive. Altruism is our unselfish regard for the welfare of others. Taylor Swift mentions altruistic and altruism in one of her songs, so I think a lot more people know this word now. But your willingness to help others, even if it's not something that benefits yourself. So why are you willing to help others? Social exchange theory says that we do tend to consider the cost to ourselves, and if there's low risk, and what is the reward. Another factor we consider is, are they part of our in-group? So like if I saw somebody pulled over on the side of the road, I generally probably would not pull over to help them, just because I know that that can be dangerous. And I don't know how much I could actually help them, like change a tire. But if I saw a mom with another kid, then I might pull over because I can relate to them more. I feel more altruistic to somebody who is in my in-group, and maybe I can't change their tire, but I can help call somebody for them. The reciprocity norm, also part of altruistic behavior, the expectation that you should return help to others. We feel obligated to help. Like somebody helped you, so now you feel obligated to help them. And I know that happens with like cheating. Like they're like, I'm going to give you the answers for this quiz. You give me the other answers for that other class. So that's a reciprocity norm, not a good life example, but that's reciprocity. A lot of times as an adult, if you own a truck, just wait. All your friends will be like, can you help me move? And then after they help you move, they need to help you move later. Social responsibility norm, largely learned norm that that tells us to help others when they need us, even though they may not repay us in kind. And again, that ties into you're more likely to help the people when they're more like you. We're more likely to help when there's a clarity for the need of help. Like it's very clear somebody needs help. Whereas you're not sure, like, do they really need help? Or are they just like are they sick? Like one of the examples they use is somebody who's laying like on the sidewalk, and it's not clear, like, are they a homeless person who's laying there, or are they, if they're dressed like clearly like a business person who like passed out, then people will go help. But if it's not clear, then people are less likely to help. One of the examples of that was the Kitty Genovese case. And again, that we've talked about that, the murder of the woman. Lots of people may have heard her being stabbed late at night. I was in New York City. I was thinking it was in Chicago. But this led to the idea or clarification of the diffusion of responsibility, that the more people are present, the responsibility for helping spreads out to others. And that means usually people are less likely to help. So we've talked about, you guys know, because of diffusion of responsibility, in a case of like an emergency, you should act because you know that others are not going to feel personally responsible. So you know about this theory, so you help. You step in and help. And again, this leads to the bystander effect, the idea that people are less likely to help because of that diffusion of responsibility. If there's only one person there, they're more likely to help. Whereas when it's diffused, they are less likely to help. Who sent an e-haul pass? We're almost done. Who sent the pass? Somebody sent a pass.
Someone trying to come here?
Somebody's probably trying to come here. Naya, go ahead and go. Oh, yeah, and I'll end the other one. All right, let's see. The feel good, do good phenomenon. This is also part of social exchange theory. People are willing to help others and be altruistic when they're in a good mood. We said ask your parents for help when you're in a good mood, or they're in a good mood. Robbers Cave experiment. We talked about this when we reviewed important studies. There were two competitive groups at a summer camp for boys. The place was called Robbers Cave State Park, and they caused the boys to not like each other. So they created an in-group, out-group bias, and then they created some things happening at the camp where they needed the boys to come together to help each other. So they came together with superordinate goals. They like repaired the water supply. They helped a truck that got stuck and it was bringing in food. So it showed that competitive groups can work together when they have a superordinate goal, a goal that is bigger than themselves. A common example of that is 9/11, when Republicans and Democrats came together to fight against terrorism after the fall of the Twin Towers. The next section was about the psychology of attraction, who we are actually attracted to. Proximity, so actual geographic nearness. If this was human geography, we would talk about globalization and time-space compression, about how nowadays you can be near people on the internet. And that can create attraction. But in general, actual nearness. The mere exposure effect, the repeated exposure to novel stimuli increases one's liking of that item. So the more you're exposed to something, whether it's music, a person, a fashion pattern, you are more likely to start liking them. So the more you're around someone new, the more you let you grow to like them. Environment, the actual circumstances under which people first meet also influence attraction. So if you're in some kind of situation where you can bond, if you ever watch action movies where like they're in some major, this is an old movie, but Speed with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, they're on this bus that's like out of control. And of course they fall in love at the end because they went through this trauma together. So it was the environment, but also like going through something positive. Like people ended up next to each other at a concert and they bond over that. So an environment. Other things, physical attractiveness does play a role. The matching hypothesis says that people tend to date, marry, or form committed relationships with those who are similar in physical attractiveness. So if you find somebody who's really hot with somebody who's really not hot, there's usually there's a third variable involved there. Might be money, just saying. But sometimes it could be other things. But generally, we tend to, and it has to do with how they respond to you, that they know their level of attractiveness and that they get somebody who's about the same level. Sternberg's triangular theory of love said that there's three main types of love. There's just, intimacy, passion, and decision and commitment. Here it is here. Intimacy, passion, and commitment. And then there's other types of love, non-love, liking, infatuation. I'm not going to read them all, but intimacy, passion, and commitment. We're almost done. The stereotype threat, we talked about this yesterday, usually happens with testing. You believe that you're going to be evaluated on a negative stereotype and it affects your performance. And that is a type of self-fulfilling prophecy where your belief leads to that fulfillment. So if you fear that, like my teacher hates me, it's because I'm this kind of person, you spend all that time worrying about that and not focusing on the test, then yeah, it is going to have a negative effect on you. Social traps, again, situation where we pursue our personal interest over the well-being of the whole group. That's all of it. That's the end of Unit 9 and all of our review units. Let me end the recording.